In 1962, the FBI solved 93% of all murders in the United States. Last year, less than 62%. That means right now, in 2026, roughly 4 out of every 10 killers in this country are walking free. And for serial killers specifically, the ones who plan, adapt, and repeat, that number is far worse. This is the full breakdown. Every major case where the FBI had a shot and missed. Here's something the FBI doesn't advertise. The clearance rate, that's the percentage of murder cases that end in an arrest, has been dropping for 60 straight years. Not occasionally, consistently. Every decade since the 1960s, a lower percentage of killers get caught. And serial killers are the specific case where that failure is most catastrophic because the longer they operate, the more people they kill. Every missed window, every wrong profile, every ignored tip costs lives that hadn't been taken yet. So today, we're going through the actual cases. Not just who got away, but specifically what failed and why. Because these aren't random misses, there are patterns. The FBI has made the same mistakes repeatedly across different decades, different states, different killers. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what those patterns are. Let's get into it. The Zodiac Killer, the investigation that collapsed under its own weight. Start with the most famous one, because it's the best example of how an investigation implodes. The Zodiac Killer operated in Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. 5 confirmed murders. He claimed 37. And then, nothing. No arrest, no identification, ever. The SFPD investigated an estimated 2,500 suspects over the following decades. 2,500, and according to the department itself, only about half a dozen were ever considered credible. Think about that ratio. 2,500 people, 6 worth taking seriously. The FBI took the case. The CIA was brought in to crack the Zodiac's coded letters. The only cipher ever decoded, the Z408, was cracked not by federal cryptographers, but by a married couple in Salinas. He was a history teacher. She just guessed the word kill would appear in the message. She was right. In 2004, the SFPD formally marked the case inactive, citing caseload pressure. They reopened it in 2007. As of the most recent reporting, the FBI's investigation is either ongoing or fully closed, depending on which official you ask. The Zodiac is still unidentified. If he's alive today, he's in his late 70s or older. The case will almost certainly never be solved. Why the FBI failed? Jurisdictional fragmentation. At least 4 separate agencies investigated the same case without a single command structure. Evidence wasn't shared. Leads contradicted each other. And by the time anyone tried to centralize the investigation, the trail was cold. Samuel Little, the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history that nobody was looking for. This one should make you angry. Samuel Little confessed to 93 murders across 19 states between 1970 and 2005. The FBI verified 60 of them. 60 confirmed murders. That makes him officially the most prolific serial killer in American history. More than Gary Ridgway, more than Ted Bundy, more than John Wayne Gacy. He wasn't arrested until 2012. He was 72 years old. He operated for 35 years, across more than a dozen states, killing people, and nobody connected it. Here's why. Little specifically targeted women who were, in his words, unlikely to be accounted for. Sex workers, homeless women, substance users. Many of his victims' deaths were ruled as overdoses, accidents, or undetermined causes. Some weren't even entered into any database. Some were never identified at all. The FBI's own statement after his confession said, and this is a direct quote from FBI analyst Christy Palazzolo, "For many years, Samuel Little believed he would not be caught because he thought no one was accounting for his victims. He was right. Nobody was. Why the FBI failed. Victim selection bias. Law enforcement consistently underinvestigates the murders of marginalized victims. Little knew this, exploited it deliberately, and killed 93 people because of it. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, murdered at least 49 women in Washington state. He confessed to 71. He was arrested in 2001, nearly 20 years after his first kill. Here's the part that matters. Ridgway was identified as a suspect in 1983. 1 year into his killing spree, police interviewed him, investigated him, took hair and saliva samples, and then cleared him. Because in 1984, Gary Ridgway sat down and passed a polygraph. At that point, he had already killed most of his victims. The vast majority of his 49 confirmed murders happened between 1982 and 1984. By the time he passed that test, the peak of his killing was basically over. He wasn't arrested for another 17 years, when DNA technology finally caught up with him and matched semen samples collected at crime scenes. And here's a detail that's somehow even worse. Paint samples from his truck were found on one of his earliest victims. They were collected, and then not tested for 20 years. The FBI's own profiling consultant on the case, Ted Bundy? They flew to Florida's death row to interview Ted Bundy, who was about to be executed, for insights on the Green River Killer. Why the FBI failed? Over-reliance on the polygraph as a screening tool. Polygraphs are not admissible in U.S. courts because they're unreliable. The FBI knew this. They cleared a serial killer with one anyway. Dennis Rader, BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, murdered 10 people in Kansas between 1974 and 1991. He then stopped for 13 years, and when he came back in 2004, he started sending letters to the police again. The FBI and local law enforcement spent years trying to identify him through those letters, and they almost didn't catch him. What got him was a floppy disk he sent to the police in 2004, which he had specifically asked investigators if it was traceable. They told him no. On television, it was traceable. The metadata on the disk led directly to Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. Dennis Rader was the president of the congregation. He was arrested in 2005, 31 years after his first murder. But here's the failure. For 31 years, BTK operated within a relatively small geographic area, taunted police publicly, and sent multiple communications directly to the media and law enforcement. He communicated obsessively. He wanted to be known. And for 31 years, nobody caught him. Why the FBI failed? His dormancy period confused investigators. When BTK went silent from 1991 to 2004, the working assumption was that he was dead or imprisoned. Nobody maintained active investigation of a killer who had simply stopped and chosen to start again. The Long Island serial killer, also known as Lisk, or the Gilgo Beach Killer, is believed to have murdered between 10 and 17 people over a period spanning from roughly the mid-1990s to at least 2010. Most victims were sex workers who advertised on Craigslist. In 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested and charged with several of the murders. But the case is not closed. There is credible evidence suggesting more than one killer. Multiple victims don't match Heuermann's suspected profile. The investigation is ongoing. What makes this case a landmark failure is the timeline. Bodies began appearing on Gilgo Beach in 2010, but the FBI has linked murders to this killer going back as far as 1996. 14 years of kills before the first body was found. During the investigation, it also emerged that the local police chief at the time, James Burke, had actively obstructed the FBI's investigation into the case. He was convicted of obstruction of justice in 2016. He was never charged in connection with the murders. Why the FBI failed. Interagency obstruction. Active interference from local law enforcement. And the same pattern we saw with Samuel Little. Victims who were considered low priority, which slowed the initial response by years. Between 1971 and 1972, an unknown killer murdered 6 young black girls in Washington, D.C. The victims ranged from 10 to 18 years old. The FBI investigated. Multiple task forces were formed. 0 arrests. And then it got worse. Over the following decades, the case files were improperly handled. Records went missing. Evidence was lost or contaminated. Today, the files are described by investigators as incomplete. The Freeway Phantom case has never been solved. The killer has never been identified, and much of the evidence that might have identified him is gone. Why the FBI failed. Evidence mismanagement at a systemic level. And again, victims who were black girls from D.C. in the early 1970s were not treated as a national priority. The investigation reflected that. Between 1976 and 1977, 4 children were murdered in Oakland County, Michigan. The killer was meticulous. He bathed each victim before the crime, which meant he was leaving almost no usable trace evidence. In 2012, investigators managed to extract a DNA profile from what little evidence remained. They ran it against every database available. It matched nobody. That DNA profile still exists. The case is still open. Nobody has ever been charged. The Oakland County child killer remains unidentified today. The only lead is a genetic blueprint that doesn't match a single person in any law enforcement database. Why the FBI failed. There's an argument that, in this case, the failure isn't the investigation. It's the limits of the technology at the time of the crime. The real failure is that genealogical DNA databases, which have solved cold cases going back decades, haven't yet produced a match in this one. Which means whoever did this either has no living relatives who've used consumer DNA services, or has never had their DNA collected in any context. In February 2009, a woman walking her dog in Albuquerque, New Mexico, discovered a human bone in what turned out to be a former construction site. When police excavated the area, they found the remains of 11 women, most of whom had been missing since 2003 to 2006. A $100,000 reward for information has been in place ever since. No official suspect has ever been named. The victims were women who had been reported missing years earlier and hadn't generated significant investigative attention at the time of their disappearance. Once again, the same profile. Marginalized victims. Delayed investigation. By the time the bodies were found, the trail was years cold. Why the FBI failed. The delay between disappearances and discovery is the core problem. If even a fraction of these missing persons cases had been investigated with the urgency they deserved at the time of the disappearance, the evidence landscape in 2009 might have looked very different. From 1978 to approximately 1992, an unknown killer murdered a series of women across Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and other Bible Belt states. Most victims had red or reddish hair. Most were hitchhikers or sex workers. Most were found along major interstate highways. The case became known as the Redhead Murders. The killer has never been identified. A trucker named Jerry Leon Johns was considered a likely suspect in at least one of the murders, but he died in prison before he could be formally indicted. What makes this case stand out isn't just that it's unsolved. It's that it's 6 states, over a decade, and it wasn't even treated as a single case for years. Individual jurisdictions investigated individual murders. Nobody connected them into a pattern quickly enough to matter. Why the FBI failed. The VICAP database, the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, which is specifically designed to link murders across jurisdictions, wasn't functioning at full capacity in the early years of this killing spree. The tool designed to catch exactly this type of cross-state killer wasn't ready in time. Between 1986 and 1989, 3 couples were found murdered along the Colonial Parkway in Virginia. A 4th couple disappeared entirely. Their bodies were never recovered. A vehicle and some clothing were found. The 4 individuals are presumed dead. The victims were pairs, couples specifically. That's an unusual target selection that dramatically complicates profiling. The FBI developed profiles. None led to an arrest. The Colonial Parkway killer has never been identified. The case remains open. Why the FBI failed? Unusual victimology broke the standard profiling model. When a killer's target selection doesn't fit established categories, the existing profile frameworks underperform. The FBI's behavioral unit developed profiles based on cases it had seen before. This one didn't fit the pattern. These aren't isolated cases. The same 4 failures show up across almost every case we just covered. 1. Victim selection bias. When killers target marginalized victims, sex workers, homeless individuals, runaways, people of color, investigations move slower, resources are lower, and the media attention is minimal. Samuel Little understood this explicitly. The Freeway Phantom, the Long Island Killer, the West Mesa Bone Collector, all of them operated in this space. 2. Jurisdictional fragmentation. The Zodiac had 4 agencies investigating without coordination. The Redhead murders took years to be treated as a single case. The Colonial Parkway killer crossed multiple law enforcement territories. Every time a case involves more than one jurisdiction, information silos form. 3. Over-reliance on unreliable tools. The polygraph cleared Gary Ridgway while he was actively killing people. Profiling frameworks failed on the Colonial Parkway killer because his victimology didn't fit the template. The FBI builds systems based on past cases. Killers who operate outside those patterns create gaps. 4. Dormancy blindness. BTK went quiet for 13 years, and investigators essentially closed the mental file on him. Serial killers who pause, for any reason, benefit from investigations that stall and then shut down. In 1962, the FBI reported a national homicide clearance rate of 93%. That rate dropped 29 points by 1994. It has never recovered. And the cases we've covered today are exactly why. The killers didn't necessarily get smarter. The system has specific, documented, repeatable failure modes. And until those are fixed, the pattern continues. If you're new here, this channel is entirely data-driven true crime. No speculation, no filler. Every number you heard today is sourced and verifiable. Hit subscribe if that's what you want more of. And the next video, how the FBI actually profiles a serial killer, the real scoring system they use, the specific behavioral categories, and the cases where the profile was completely wrong. It's already filmed. It drops next week. I'll see you there.